Hey, you guys, let's talk about drawing and sketching inside Photoshop and see what we can do with it. Alrighty, let me share my screen and we'll start us off. So, a couple things you need to do to get yourself set up is obviously you're going to need some sort of drawing tablet. And this video is dedicated to using a traditional Wacom style drawing tablet. So, I've got here a Wacom Intuos tablet. Could be similar to using a bamboo or one of the other type of drawing tablets. And this is one of the more or less expensive tablets where you're not actually drawing on a screen. You're just drawing on a side tablet with your stylus. This can take a little bit of getting used to. And it's one of the ways that many of us have drawn digitally for a long time. We've gotten used to drawing this way, but basically you have to get over the fact that you won't be looking at your hand while you draw. And there's a little bit of a disconnect. And it takes, frankly, it takes a couple weeks to get used to that as you start trying to draw on a tablet. Of course, there are lots of other tablet options, iPads, Surface tablets, even full screen Intuos Cintiqs that you can use that are great for drawing. But again, this is dedicated to the good old tried and true side tablet. So another couple things you want to get set up as you're going is you want to think about your workspace and the tools you're going to be using. I prefer to work in a method similar to how I would work on paper. And that means that I like to work with light pencils, and then I do build up and add darker pencils over time. I like to do construction lines, do measurement and proportions in a typical fashion that I might do on paper. The benefit of drawing digitally, though, is that I can do this in layers. And so I can do rough drawings and then revise them as I go and not get stuck with only one way of sketching and then have to erase and do all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's a lot easier to work digitally because I can work on a layer and refine my drawing over time as I start working and refining the picture. All right, another thing that's really helpful in Photoshop and getting yourself set up is learning about screen orientation. And basically, when you're trying to draw like this on a tablet and you are kind of rigid and stuck, it's not natural. It's not normal. You know, normally if you're working on a piece of paper, you'd be turning your body, you'd be moving your hand, moving your arm. And so that's a much more natural feeling. But if you're kind of stuck, it doesn't work. So something I've gotten used to is holding the R key on my keyboard. And what that does inside Photoshop, it is allows you to turn and tilt your page. And it's a little bit of an optical illusion, but what it's doing is it's helping your mind get over the fact that you can't turn the paper. And so again, as you get used to it, get used to sketching this way, it just becomes kind of second nature as you work against the screen. You tilt and turn in a way that works with your hand motion. You'll notice that what I'm doing is working with kind of a blue pencil. And that's one of the things that I like to do is I like to draw in blue. It's just a holdover from comic book days where you want to draw in light blue because later on you're going to use ink pens to go over the top, and you don't want to worry about erasing because if you're using light blue, that light blue is not going to be picked up by a scanner or a copier, and so that it also creates a nice subtle surface to work on top of because you're going to be doing more refined drawing as you go. So that's just a holdover from that. Other people use different colors. I know some folks like to use red or other light charcoal type colors. Doesn't really matter. It's up to you, whatever works best for your process. Now, when sketching, I don't like to use any kind of eraser at this point. I'm not worried about being perfect. That's something that you just have to learn through practice as you're drawing and sketching, is to just never get stuck with a line, allow yourself to make mistakes, and don't worry about making mistakes. You'll notice in the beginning, I put the earware over here. I wasn't really looking at my reference when I started sketching, so that's no big deal. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to waste time worrying about making this a perfect picture. I like to think of this as being like a blob of clay, like a sculptor might work. They just throw down the raw material and then they slowly refine it as they go and make it a little bit better as they go. They sculpt it. So for me, I've said it before, this is sculptural drawing. I like to take the rough lines and slowly just kind of evolve what I'm working on. And maybe I gotta, brush off a piece here, hone a piece there. I haven't really decided in this little sketch if I'm trying to do a precise representation or more of a caricature. I think this is turning into a little bit of a caricature of my model here. So again, just kind of roughly sketching. Another interesting thing is when you're using these rotation tools, when you're using R, that's the rotate button on the toolbar. Notice how once it's turned a little bit, it frees up the workspace, the artboard. So I can slide that all around my picture window. Really helpful. If it's stuck in rigid space, it doesn't, it does, you can slide it around, but again, following the tilt of my hand, it's much better to be able to turn it. I can't move my tablet, but I can move the screen to make it more comfortable with my hand motion. All right. Another thing you may have noticed as I'm working is I can zoom in, zoom out. On a Wacom tablet, there's a little slide dial on the side. You can just slide your finger on it and it'll zoom in and zoom out. You can use Command plus or Control plus on your keyboard, Control plus, Control minus to zoom in, zoom out as necessary. The space bar is really handy for sliding your picture around in the window as you draw. Again, all of that just making it easier to move the sketch around in your screen as you work. Another handy tool. I didn't even explain this in the beginning, but I'm using on the new Photoshop these Kyle dry media brushes. So I'm using the paintbrush, and then I'm using in the brush selector the Kyle dry media brushes, and I just picked a charcoal pencil. Now, if the size of your charcoal pencil isn't quite right, notice how you can scale your brush using your bracket keys. So the bracket keys are beneath the plus and minus button on your keyboard, and you can make that a little bit thicker, bolder. And over time, it's really beneficial if you're working on a tablet like this to memorize some of those keyboard shortcuts. It will help you kind of speed up your process. If you're always hunting for the mouse or the menu, it can make it a little more difficult. So spacebar, Command plus, Command minus, R, rotate, those things become really helpful as you're moving along. All right. So what would I do next? Once I have kind of my rough drawing in place, then what I would do is I would refine this and I would add a new layer above it. And sometimes I'll call that sketch. And then I might pick a gray color as my, my drawing color. Now I'm going to pretend in my mind at least that I'm drawing with a pencil, a darker, like a 4B or a 6B pencil or something. I probably will lighten this blue pencil a little bit so it's just not super vibrant in there. This is where I zoom in, and because I've got kind of that structure design, that structure built, now is when I might start doing the actual sketch part, where I start to maybe get a little more deliberate with my lines and work on building up the form a little more. And I'm going kind of light. I might try out one of the other brushes actually. Let's see. Let's try like the hard pencil, see how that feels. Yeah, that's pretty good. Sorry, sometimes when I draw, I kind of trail off. Notice I switched to that pencil brush, a hard brush, and the texture changed a little bit on my drawing, which is fine. It's just, I'm going to erase some of these lines and kind of go back over and go with kind of a lighter sketch. Yeah, I like that a little better than the original. You can see how I'm just slowly building up. The purpose of this drawing stage is to decide, what lines need to be emphasized, what form needs to be developed. And this all changes kind of depending on how I plan on finishing this picture. So if this is going to become a vector drawing, I'll probably continue this rough sketch, and I'll add the lines, make them more refined, kind of deciding where I want those lines to be. But I won't do any shading or anything like that. I'm just going to work on the line art, because I'll go back to Illustrator and trace over my drawing to finish the vector art. Okay, but if this is going to become a digital painting, then that's a different story. Digital paintings, I like to keep the pencil lines. So what I'll do is I'll start working on shading and other type of grayscaling as I go, where this line becomes a part of the painting process. And so I'll switch to different brushes for that kind of detail and that kind of that drawing style. So it all depends on where you're headed, the way you finish off your picture. So another process might be to do an inking style. If this is for comics or some sort of animation, then my ultimate goal will be to go one more step, to take my sketch drawing and then convert it into a nice, clean, crisp black and white drawing with ink lines. And so it's kind of done in stages like that, you guys. So you're doing, 2 or 3 levels. Each level, your picture's coming a little more into focus, and you're creating that character or that design or whatever your plan is, right? So that can take a few hours, working through that drawing, refining it, figuring out what you want it to be. Now, one more thing before we go is I'm going to talk about something that we call lightboxing. And, this might be a little controversial, but for students, I do want to bring it up because, You can learn a lot by studying anatomy, by doing what we call tracing. So here, see how this might work. I've got the model here on my page. I'm going to create a new blank layer above it. And I'm going to take this photo and I'm going to lighten it down so it's kind of a soft tone. Now, basically, what my goal here would be to use this drawing as a basis for this photo as a basis for my sketch. Now, in the art world, somebody would do a little light boxing, as we call it, which would have been, taking a photo or taking a picture and projecting it onto a canvas or projecting it onto to a painted board as you got ready to do your drawing. And this is a technique that, portrait painters and masters have done for a long time, where they'll take that photograph as reference and use it to help them create their portrait. And again, it's a little bit controversial because obviously as artists, we want to be able to draw from scratch. It's an important part of our process. But I got to tell you, portrait painters, illustrators, and others who work on likenesses, they do this, dirty little secret. And if you don't do this, you've got mad skills. But not every artist is the same. So I can tell you this process for taking a picture and just kind of using it as if you had it on a light table and a piece of paper and you were redrawing it and sketching it through that tracing process. But even still, it doesn't mean that the quality is going to be good. So not everybody's trace is the same. Not everybody's sketch is the same. And so even if you use this visual aid to help you kind of figure out proportion and do your drawing, still doesn't mean that your picture is going to be perfect. Some people might use it as a crutch. Personally, I like to use it as a step in the process, especially if I'm trying to get a realistic photo likeness. I'll use it at the drawing stage because it'll help me get the proportion quickly done. It'll help me get the detail done. And we'll turn off that layer and you can kind of see the sketch appearing there. Like I said, this helps you get the detail, helps you get the proportion right, helps you get the likeness, but it's not going to help you in the painting process at all. So sure, this might get you down the road, get the drawing done, but painting is where the rubber hits the road. So for new students, folks that really want to get their hands dirty digitally, as you want to say, lightboxing is okay. I think it's one of those tools in the toolbox that you use depending on what you're trying to create. But don't use it exclusively. In other words, don't assume that just because you can trace a likeness that that's going to somehow make a nice piece of art. It's not. It really does come down to the style, your individual brush strokes, your individual detail lines. That's where it really starts to come together, and you can see somebody's skill. Still requires the artist's eye and the artist's drawing ability to be able to translate a picture into something special. I do find personally that using with a Wacom tablet, like I said, it can be difficult with practice or without practice to get a drawing just right when you're actually not watching your hand motion. Lightboxing, I think, helps with that process. So that's why I like to mention it as a viable alternative to sketching from scratch. All right, so that's a little bit of an explanation on how to use a tablet, how to get started with Photoshop. and getting your pictures done. All right, so hope that helps. Let me know if you have questions. Talk to you guys later. See you around.